How does a torpedo detonating hundreds of miles away in the Indian Ocean immediately inflate the numbers on your local petrol pump? To trace that connection, we have to look at the Iris Dena. Just 2 weeks ago, this Iranian warship was in India, peacefully participating in the Milan 2026 naval exercises. On its journey home, a U.S. Navy submarine fired an Mk-48 torpedo into the defenseless vessel. In seconds, the ship sank. 87 Iranian soldiers were killed, barely 40 nautical miles off the coast of Sri Lanka. India has spent a decade branding itself the net security provider of the Indian Ocean, meaning it claims responsibility for the safety of these exact waters. Yet faced with a sunken ship returning from its own military exercise, the government stayed silent, aside from a single official tweet claiming it wasn't their business. Backing away from the role of regional guardian signals a collapse of India's influence in its own backyard. This diplomatic retreat is the first step in a chain reaction that hits your personal finances. The destruction of the Dena occurred within a massive, coordinated offensive. Seeking a total regime change after the death of the supreme leader, U.S. and Israeli forces struck over 2,000 targets across every major Iranian city. Iran responded by launching missiles at 27 U.S. military bases spread across 9 countries in the Middle East. Washington anticipated that removing key leaders would cause Ayatollah Khamenei's regime to collapse and accept defeat. That calculation failed, and the fighting continues to spread. With military force failing to produce a swift victory, the strategy has shifted from dropping bombs to choking off global trade. Iran has played its most dangerous card, shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. They have explicitly threatened to set fire to any commercial ship attempting to pass through this critical maritime choke point. This map highlights the Strait of Hormuz in red. It is a narrow waterway where 20% of the world's total oil consumption must pass. More importantly, those data flow lines represent the 55% of India's oil imports that are entirely dependent on this single route. As those supply lines vanish on the map, the immediate effect is a massive vacuum in energy resources. You can see India's oil reserve gauges plummeting in real time. Unlike China, which maintains massive emergency stockpiles, the Indian government has allowed its strategic oil reserves to dwindle. The official estimate now sits at a mere 25-day supply. Faced with this shortage, the United States Treasury released a public statement, announcing they had granted India permission to purchase Russian oil for a period of 30 days. An independent nation of over 1 billion people now waits for a foreign superpower to authorize energy purchases to keep the lights on. This subservience directly follows the Prime Minister's recent diplomatic visits. In the wake of these meetings, the administration has aggressively aligned with U.S. and Israeli objectives, ignoring the fallout in its own region. Allowing Washington to dictate these trade terms represents a sharp decline in India's strategic independence. This submission turns a regional power into a subordinate player on a foreign chessboard. This is a sharp departure from India's historical doctrine of strategic autonomy, the practice of making foreign policy decisions independently of superpower pressure. In 1979, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi publicly condemned the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan, even though Moscow was a close ally. In 2003, Atal Bihari Vajpayee faced immense pressure from Washington to deploy 20,000 Indian troops to the Iraq War. He unanimously refused the demand. Fast forward to 2011, and Manmohan Singh stood at the United Nations podium to explicitly condemn Western military interventions in Libya. For decades, Indian leaders maintained a firm moral stance on the global stage. That independence has been abandoned, driven by widespread allegations that figures like Donald Trump hold severe leverage over the current administration's leadership. Meanwhile, the CIA is executing a familiar strategy in the Middle East. They are currently attempting to arm rebel Kurdish factions inside Iran to spark an uprising and overthrow the Islamic regime. We have decades of evidence showing the results of this tactic. Flooding fractured regions with weapons is exactly how terrorist organizations like ISIS were formed, leaving Iraq and Syria in ruins. As Washington manufactures another cycle of instability, the economic shockwaves hit your bank account. We are already seeing the impact through sudden price hikes on LPG cylinders for daily cooking. Other nations are pushing back. Spain, a direct American ally and NATO member, recently denied the U.S. permission to use its military bases for this specific conflict. When a government trades away its diplomatic spine to appease a superpower, it doesn't just lose respect on the world stage. You pay the penalty at the grocery store and at the pump.